What's up, folks, and welcome to Retro Ramble. So, I got another one of these modern re-releases of an obscure arcade game for you today. Rodaleika Games and Inin Games have been putting out a lot of these over the last little while, and some of them have been pretty cool, actually. They've been putting out a lot of lesser-known shmups, which I've really appreciated. And today I've got an interesting obscure arcade platformer for you, and one that, well, it's a sequel to a game that a lot of people may know, but most have not heard of this one. So this is Cannon Dancer, also known as Osman, and it's a game that was originally put out by a company called Mitchell, who actually were around for quite a while and did a number of different games for both consoles and home platforms, but a lot of people haven't heard of them. And they're long since gone, and Inin Games, I guess, picked up some of their old IPs, and that's what this is. So this game originally never came out in Japan, but we have an English localization of it available for this re-release, which is what Osman is here. And well, there's an interesting history behind this. So if you're not interested in the history or to hear about the features of the collection, check the chapter skips down in the description, and you can jump straight to the game if you want to do that. So a little bit of a history lesson on this. So this game is actually a sort of unofficial sequel to the fairly famous, I would say, arcade and Sega Genesis, and it was on some other things, I think, as well, was an action platformer called Strider. It actually got a totally different game on the NES, which I've actually finished back in the day. And Strider was fairly well regarded, but the arcade version was known to be very, very difficult. Well, for whatever reason, Capcom never made another Strider. And the original designer of that wanted to make another one, so he partnered up with Mitchell in order to release this. It's not the same thing, but you can see the DNA of Strider all over this thing, for sure. And well, when I heard about that, that's what intrigued me about it. I was like, okay, Strider was cool, and I'd love to see what they would do with a spiritual sequel to it. So that's what we're going to check out here. And, well, as for the collection, I'm going to go over this pretty fast because I've covered these Rodaleika re-releases before. They all use the same framework, and the options are pretty much the same. So I'm going to go through them more quickly here, but you can look at some of the previous ones if you want a more detailed thing on that. So, as you can see here, it looks like there's two different games in here. There isn't really. Osman is just the modern English localization of it. So you can play the original Cannon Dancer in Japanese, which is cool. I'm glad that they put that option in there, but Osman is what we'll check out first. So, like these Rodaleika collections, there's a good selection of options. You can rebind all the keys. There's a feature in here called auto grab as well. We'll get into grabs later. There's a couple of different aspect ratios you can use. Not as many as I would have hoped, but if you want ultra pixel perfect resolution and want to play it in a postage stamp, you can do that, or you can bring it up to this horrendous, zoomed in thing. But there's a couple of scale filters in this as well. There's technically wallpapers in this to change around the background. There's only one or the other, so not really that much. But there is a fairly extensive shader menu here where you can adjust the scan lines and other such things to your heart's content, which is really cool. They handle that very well, I think. There's also what's called enhancements here, which give you some extra abilities. We'll get more into that, as well as straight up cheats. And, well, unless you want to put a lot of time into this, you might need some of those if you want to see the ending of it, but we'll get into that. And there's save states as well, which is something that's always nice to see in a game like this, especially if you want to get some practice in and work on a particularly hard part of the game. So, you have two different modes here. You've got the standard mode, which enables all of the modern quality of life features like rewinding, save states, cheats, and full enhancements. But because you can cheat in this mode, achievements are disabled when you're playing in this. This game does have a score system, but there's no leaderboards for it. And then this is the more standard mode, where this is what's interesting, is that it plays like the arcade version, but because this game is so blindingly hard, which I will show you later, it does still allow you to enable what they call enhancements. So you got double jump, being invincible when you jump, being invincible when you slide, being invincible when you attack, and you can have 4 or 8 extra credits, though turning on 8 credits uses 2 of the enhancements up. And there's also auto attack, which basically just means that rather than having to push the button every time you want to attack, you can hold the button down and it will attack at a different, frequency and pace, essentially. So it's cool you can do that. You can turn on 2 of these modes, but The reason they do that is because, like I said, this game is ridiculously difficult. So I'll skip that here. This game, just like Strider, is weird. It's this weird, like, cyberpunk future. There's a ton of really strange and odd characters in this. But as you can see, it's got a very distinctive, very cool look to it. I think the art in this is actually pretty neat. And this game did a lot for a 16-bit arcade game. I think showcases its technology quite well. There's a lot on display here. The sites of all the levels are very, very different. They all take place in different locations. And the visuals of this in particular, I think, are really impressive. The sound is fine for this era. It's nothing to write home about, but it's not bad either by any stretch. So you got a lot of different options here. So yeah, so if you like the sightseeing option, you're definitely going to have a lot of that in here. And as you can see, this is a melee-focused platformer. Now, in Strider, you had that really cool sort of sword, weird, like, angled blade kind of thing. This doesn't have that because that's probably a little too close to the original, but it is a more melee-focused game. But the trick with this one that I think you've maybe been seeing a little bit already is that if you attack while in the air, you will temporarily spawn clones of yourself in place, and these clones will mimic whatever your character is doing. So, if you want to do more damage to either a group of enemies or to a boss, and really control the environment, which is a key mechanic in this, then you can utilize that. You can spawn those clones of yourself, and if you spawn them correctly, you can do multiple amounts of damage to characters or enemies that you couldn't do normally. You also saw there is sort of a screen clearing attack, which is that sort of thing where he leaps around and attacks multiple enemies at once. You get a certain number of those. They're down in the bottom left corner there. You get a certain amount of those that you can use per life, and then you also have a life meter. You can you can upgrade your life a little bit, but you can only take a certain number of hits before you die. And the thing with this game is it's very frenetic. You have to really pay attention to the environment and really be watching where everything is. There's no two ways about it. Much like Strider, if you wanted to perfect this game while, you know, doing the whole thing in one credit, then it's going to require a lot of practice. There's a lot of things happening at the same time. You have to be constantly looking all around, watching for all directions. There's a bunch of different bosses in this, and I will give credit. The boss design in this, I think, is very cool. The bosses have a lot of different designs to them, wildly varying attack patterns. They have multiple different types of attacks, like this guy had that saw blade, and then he's got this fire thing. Some levels have multiple bosses in them, and some levels are longer than others. Some are fairly short, some are quite a bit longer. The amount of enemy variety in this in general is, I think, its greatest strength, because the enemies change up a lot, and there's a huge number of enemies in this, both big and small, and they all have very different attacks. You know, it's not variations on a theme. You're going to have to learn a number of different types of attacks and enemy patterns in this to really master this game well. And I think that's a really cool thing to see in an arcade title like this. This is definitely not your sort of paint-by-numbers action platformer like a lot of ones from the era are. This one has a very distinct style and personality to it, and you know you're playing something unique and different with this one, for sure. That said, the reason they allow you to enable a couple of those enhancements out the gate is because this game gets incredibly hard. The small amount of damage you can take, the number of different enemies that you'll run into, the amount of visual complexity going on screen, which can really make things confusing and hard to follow, is a factor. And a lot of the attacks are just frankly pretty cheap in that kind of arcade way that you would expect things like that to be. And it only gets harder. The last level of this is a boss rush, which is something that was not uncommon in games of the day. But it reminds me a lot of Magician Lord for the Neo Geo, which is a game that I actually did like a lot. but that game got so ridiculously unfair and cheap near the end, especially in the last level where you had to do a boss rush, which this one makes you do as well. I don't know if you have to fight every boss in the game or only certain ones, because I've never gotten through it yet. I've tried, and I just can't pull it off. It's incredibly difficult, especially because in the last level, when you die to any one of the bosses, you have to start the whole level over again. You don't respawn in place like you do in levels like this. There aren't even any checkpoints. So, yeah, it's kind of brutal. And you can also have situations like this where the game can have you try to do a fairly difficult platforming section, and the jumping in this doesn't always feel super great, and if you miss it, it's instant death, and you got to come back to where you were. So it's very unforgiving. It's very unforgiving in an arcade-like style, but I think it aims high even for that. It's definitely a tough title, for sure. Now, one of the things I haven't shown you yet is the suplexing and throwing, which we talked about in the menu here. And the main reason I haven't shown you that yet is because I frankly don't use it very much, because I find it's kind of more trouble than it's worth for what it offers. So I'll try to show you this with a regular enemy in the next level, but basically the way this works is if you press the jump button when you contact an enemy, you can grab that enemy, and you can choose to either throw them or suplex them. The suplex does a bunch of extra damage, and the throw allows you to throw an enemy into another enemy and basically, have one enemy take out multiple other ones. But the thing is, the timing of the button presses for it has to be very, very specific, and it requires... I'll skip the story thing here. The timing of the button press has to be very, very specific, and I just find it's more trouble than it's worth. I find it's better to just spam the attack button and focus on taking out the large number of enemies on the screen as quickly as you can, rather than trying to use the throw attack or the suplex, because I find it takes so long to reliably pull that kind of attack off that you're just opening yourself up to way worse amounts of attacks while waiting for that to execute. Now, some may disagree. I'm going to see if I can do it there. You saw there I kind of did it with one of the scorpions. But you see what happened. While trying to do that, I got hit by other things. Because while you're executing that suplex or that throw, you're not invulnerable. Unless you enable the enhancements for it, you're never invulnerable in this game. Everything you do, whether it's jumping, attacking, sliding, or throwing around enemies, leaves you completely exposed. And you have a fairly big hitbox, so it's not easy to avoid taking damage in those situations. And that's where this will get very, very, very frustrating. And where I've generally found that the suplex and throw attacks are just not worth it. I'm sure if you can get the timing down really well, I want to check and see if there's speed runs of this, because people who can speed run this game would be very, it would be very impressive to watch. But unless you're really good at that kind of stuff, you are going to find yourself frustrated a lot. You're going to try to find yourself pulling off attacks and taking more damage than you're dealing out, and you're just going to get really frustrated. So this is a game where if you want to do well at it, if you just want to enable the cheats and blow your way through it so you can see it till the end, okay, sure. But if you want to, if this is something that you really want to get good at and try to perfect and or even 1cc, you are going to be putting a lot of hours into this with a lot of frustration and a lot of overcoming the cheaper elements of this game. I mean, games like Magician Lord, I hated how stupid hard that game is and I never finished it, but people have. The game can absolutely be completed. So can this one, and you can 1cc it if you're that good. And this will encourage that. And that was clearly what they went for when they designed this game, and ain't nothing wrong with that. I just don't know. I don't think I have the time or ability or patience to get that good at one title is all. The only other thing I'm going to say about this, now I'm playing the Xbox version. I can't speak to the other versions, but this one has a really weird bug in it for some reason. So, as usual with these Radaleka arcade re-releases, they're not on PC. I don't know why they don't bother doing that, but they don't. But there's one really weird problem with this Xbox version, which is with the achievements. I actually had to double check to make sure that the version of this I was playing was not some pre-release beta, and apparently it isn't. But the achievements, as someone who's been playing games with achievements since the launch of the Xbox 360, the achievements in this are broken in a rather hilarious way, which is basically that you'll do something to unlock a particular achievement, and a different one will unlock. With the exception of the achievements you get for beating specific levels, every achievement I've unlocked in this has been for something else than that achievement is supposed to be for. It's almost like, they had the Excel sheet or the database or however you set the achievement triggers up, and somebody just scrambled it by accident before they published the game. So if you're a hardcore achievement hunter and you want to S rank this game, you're probably going to have to look at the achievement list, and you're going to have to research it, because you're going to find that most of the achievements you have are for different things than you've actually done. And it's going to take you, you're going to have to look at the ones you don't have and try to discern from that what it actually wants you to do in order to unlock them. I've never seen that before. I'm sure it's something they could easily patch. These Radalaika releases don't tend to get patches because, at the end of the day, you're just playing an emulator, so there really is rarely anything to fix. But those achievement triggers are just completely hosed, and I thought it was kind of funny, but that's something they probably want to look into. I also, when I was doing some of my research for this, I was actually using the Xbox streaming remote play to play this game in a different part of the house, and I did find that if you are using the streaming function on the Xbox and suspend the console without closing this game first, when you try to run it again, you'll just get a black screen. That's not the first game that's happened with. It's a little strange. If I start it locally on the console, it doesn't seem to be a problem. It's only a streaming thing, and not a lot of people use that. But nonetheless, that's something that does need to be ironed out, I think, at some point. But those are minor quips. The game, as well, as you can see, does have a scoring system, but there's no... And you can enter your initials in this, but... I haven't actually seen how to get the high score table to come up, because it doesn't look like there's a track mode in this re-release version, so it's kind of pointless. There's no online leaderboards in the game or anything like that. There never is in these re-releases. Would that be nice to see? Always would be nice to see, but it's not the end of the world either. But all of that said, I am glad these games come out, and I'm glad they exist, because you see all these collections that come out from Namco and Sega and Midway and all these things, and they're good, and I'm glad those exist, but they're all the same handful of popular games, because that's what people remember, and that's what they want people to buy, right? That's what's going to sell them. I'm really glad, from the angle of preservation and just the angle of people getting exposed to more interesting things, I'm really glad that somebody is stepping up and taking a lot of these arcade games that are all interesting. Not all of them are amazing, but a lot of them are, and they're all at the very least interesting artifacts, and I'm really glad someone is taking these and giving them a new lease on life through modern systems like this. If you're a really hardcore player, you understand emulation, and you could play this easily any number of ways you want. But it's also getting a modern localization, which is also nice. You don't get that through your emulator. And yeah, from the point of view of getting more older and interesting games exposed to more people, this is a great way to do that. And I'm really glad to see that someone is trying to make this work. I think that's really cool. Not all of these Radalaika re-releases have hit. I think this one is going to be incredibly niche and incredibly... you got to be someone who's into this specific type of hardcore arcade platformer and has got to be willing to put in some real effort to make the most of it. But if you are, then, it's going to be something pretty cool here. If they just iron out a couple of those little bugs, I think it'll be good. I'll keep covering these as they come out, because I do think they're important, and they don't get a lot of press or coverage. So, if you're someone who believes in preservation and wants to expose yourself to more older titles that aren't necessarily the same handful of hits that everybody remembers, these are good for that. And Ken and Dancer is definitely interesting. Am I going to put a lot more time into this? Probably not. I'd love to be able to finish it, but my God, this game is such a bugger. I don't know if that's going to happen. But, I'm going to try it, and we'll see what happens. But it's a cool little artifact, and I always like to see more of that. So, yeah, that is Ken and Dancer, also known as Osman. It is out now. It's cool, it's interesting, it's different, and it's definitely not for everybody. But if you think it might be for you, I definitely would recommend giving it a look. So, thank you very much for watching, everybody. I do appreciate it. If you like what you saw here, please do all those normal YouTube things. They really do help the channel out and get more attention. And leave a comment down below. Tell me, does this interest you? What other more obscure arcade games do you like to see come out from either the likes of Rodaleka or someone else? There's a lot of cool stuff that I'd love to see get the modern treatment, and I'd love to hear some more of what you guys are interested in as well. And as always, you can follow me over at twitch.tv/pxabstraction for multiple variety streams a week. I cover other retro titles as well as a lot of indie games over there, including a lot of games that are better suited to streaming than YouTube. We have a great community there, and I would love to see you be a part of it. Thanks again, everybody, and I'll see you on the next Retro Ramble. You folks have yourselves a good one. Take her easy.